Hi, I'm William Malik with your bit of security for July 18th, 2024. Today, we're going to talk about identity management. In this section, we're going to discuss the two hard problems that you have when deploying identity management across an organization. And in the next section next week, I'll discuss why identity management problems are, in fact, so darn hard. The two problems we're going to talk about that you have when you're deploying identity management are first, the problem of handling transitions from one set of permissions to another. Most organizations don't do it very well, and it's around the edges that things can get really messy. The other problem has to do with trying to deploy role-based, or for that matter, rule-based access control. And there are certain circumstances where it can help, but there are many where it can cause a significant amount of trouble. And I'll talk about how to fix both of those. First of all, in the problem of transitions, when you bring a new person into an organization, you set up a list of the permissions appropriate to the role that they'll be taking on at the time. As they grow in the job and mature and change and add new skills and become responsible for additional areas of competence, those permissions will also grow and change. Here's the hard part. When you go from this job to that job, it's not like you quit and then got hired again. What actually happens is that some of the permissions that you had before are going to persist to the new one. Perhaps your email address, your office phone. Others are going to be cut off immediately, like you no longer work in the treasury, you no longer have keys to the vault. Some others will be cut off after you finish a project. You're on a team that's developing marketing materials, you take a new role in a different area, but you want to be connected to that effort. And so the permissions associated with access rights to those materials will last until the project wraps up, and then you'll be disconnected, and others who are not involved with the maintenance and ongoing use of that stuff will also be disconnected. There are some permissions that in the new job you'll take right away. You need to have access to things to, update your address, perhaps, your profile. And there are other things in the new role that you're going to get eventually, but not until you've either developed some certification, completed a background test, demonstrated some competence in an area. And so it's not you start this thing and stop those things. It's a gradual process of evolution. And during that process, there will be moments which are apparently inconsistent. And that's where Identity Management Project initially got into big trouble, because they had this rather simple-minded view that whenever there was an inconsistency, it was a failure. And so you had to cancel the permissions. Well, it doesn't work quite that simply. I lived in Massachusetts, and I took a job in Poughkeepsie, and I moved from Boston to upstate New York. As soon as I arrived, I registered to vote. It was an election year, and I've always voted, haven't missed one yet. And yet, I had a valid driver's license from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Now, a simple-minded identity management procedure would say, well, you can't vote in this state and have a license in that state, so either I can't vote at all or I can't drive at all. The reason it's not a problem is that when you move, you typically have 60 days to get a new license. So being a valid registered voter in this jurisdiction, while you have a driver's license from that jurisdiction, is perfectly fine for a period of time. And so your identity management transition policy has to allow for these kinds of apparent inconsistencies. Another one that I encountered was when I was a developer long ago. There was a problem in some code I was responsible for, and I had to come in late and make a fix and get it into production. So I got in late, made the fix, had a friend check it, and then we had to move it into production. Well, here's the problem. Developers don't have access to production systems. So what I needed to do was access a system that I legally could not read or write. So I put in a request. It popped up as a illegal variation. And so what they ended up doing was turn off the security and auditing system so I could put in the change, and then they would turn it back on. And then we would manually update the documentation with a note signed by the shift supervisor. A wiser identity management solution would look at my attempt to access a production system while holding a developer's set of access rights as a kind of a weird request. And the way the system would be designed to handle weird requests would be you'd have a procedure that says, okay, if this kind of thing happens, you want to issue a request for access to three people, my boss, the shift supervisor, and somebody from the security organization. And because this was one of these, late cycle, high pressure, got to turn around fast change, all three of those people were already notified. Two of them were on site. And so when I made the request and triggered the access rights, bing, bang, boom, all three approved it. And for the next short period of time, I had write access to production systems. My activity was heavily logged. And once I was done, that access was revoked. But notice there's no gap in the audit record. The logs are complete and correct and fully annotated, explaining why this happened and who allowed it. That's a smart identity management deployment. When it comes to roles, and I'll go into this more in the second session, when you have people with similar jobs, you can define roles, but don't get carried away. At MIT years ago, they were attempting to define roles. They had 9,000 people. They took a look at all the activities, taking that as the base matter, and they developed a set of roles that collectively would grant those 9,000 people all the access they need. They came out with 14,000 roles. The average user had 8. Point to ponder. If the problem you're dealing with has a magnitude of 9,000, the solution shouldn't sound like 14,000. When it comes to roles and rules, keep it simple. 5 or 6 is probably the maximum number you should have. I know a very large organization, hundreds of thousands of people, and they use 3 roles: employee, manager, and customer. Because you can be a customer and an employee at the same time. You can have all 3, actually. The point is, keep it simple and rely on the common sense and your procedures to make sure that you're doing the right kind of documentation. And that's our bit of security for July 18th. Stay safe out there.